Hey guys, it's Emma Vogeland with TYT Politics. I hope the audio is a little bit better. I put the trusty headphones in, so everything should be good right now. But I had a very depressing political slumber last night because last night I read a lot of the comments that Donald Trump had made in Charlotte. Of course, Donald Trump has not had a kind or thoughtful response. Is that, to be expected? And I do want to preface this by saying sometimes I think that you guys think, oh, the rest of the mainstream media is criticizing Donald Trump, and we don't need that from TYT Politics. Yes, but we want to provide you with a different kind of angle. That doesn't mean that our criticisms of Hillary Clinton are waned in any way. If you watch Jordan and I, we are no fans of Hillary Clinton, and we will be quick to point out her corruption. But it is really important to also talk about the danger that is Donald Trump. So these comments really scared me and actually had made me kind of sick, and I had a little bit of trouble sleeping last night. So that's how you know you really care about this stuff. Basically, Donald Trump made some very fascist comments in terms of African Americans. What else is new? So I will read here from a Politico article. Attempting to strike a unifying presidential tone while commenting Thursday about urban unrest in Charlotte, Donald Trump veered towards off-script and attributed the violence without offering evidence to drugs. If you're not aware, drugs are a very, very big factor in what you are watching on television, he said. No evidence for that. Basically, just regurgitating a gross stereotype that because Black people are angry about how they're being treated and being murdered by police, it must be crack or whatever. It must be drugs. That's what it is. Because they're so illogical. Why won't they just sit there and take it? Take when their communities are being completely systematically targeted by cops. Just take it. Why aren't you shutting up already? If you can tell, this is an indication of how I'm going to feel throughout the rest of this story. Following a night of wall-to-wall cable coverage of the violent protests in response to another police shooting of an African-American man, the Republican presidential nominee aimed to square his law and order philosophy with his 11th hour outreach to the country's African-American communities. Trump, who trails Hillary Clinton by approximately 80 points among African-American voters, again that varies, explained that his promise to restore order to cities plagued by racial tensions is an effort to protect disproportionately affected minority communities. Oh, do tell us how you're going to protect minority communities, Donald Trump. There is no compassion in tolerating lawless conduct. Crime and violence is an attack on the poor and will never be accepted in the Trump administration. Maybe try to have a smidgen of empathy to understand that they're rioting and they're angry because they're getting shot by police at a disproportionate rate than any other group of people in this country, Black men. But lawless conduct, I was like, ugh. So that's a little fascist. That's terrifying. And, sometimes people vary on whether or not they view him as someone who's incredibly fascist. I think once I'm done with this segment, you will agree with me on this. Our job is not to make life more comfortable for the violent disruptor, but to make life more comfortable for the African-American parent trying to raise their kids in peace, to walk their children to school, and to get their children a great education. First, he blames it on drugs, which is false and fake. Then he says, we're going to have no compassion for lawless conduct. So instead of thinking maybe we should have some compassion for the fact that the reason they're rioting is because their communities are being targeted by an arm of the state, the police. No, this is just lawless conduct. We stomp down on those agitators. Just crush them. No compassion, he says, and brags about it, of course. And then our job is not to make life more comfortable for the violent disruptor. That's fascist talk there. Disruptor. Stop disrupting. Stop bothering me. I want to watch the nightly news that features a kitten stuck in a tree. I don't want to have to hear about this. Again, it's scary stuff. Out of context, again, maybe you think, he's just appealing to his base. He knows that the Republican base has boners whenever anyone talks about black people being bad people. They just love it. They eat it up like their morning cereal. And that's true. But Donald Trump's fascism and racism goes way further back. A lot of you may have heard about the Central Park Five. I know that it's been talked about a little bit on the campaign trail. Hillary Clinton could capitalize so much more on this, but doesn't, as is the story of her campaign. It's run surprisingly poorly for someone who has so much political experience. She's unable to capitalize on any of the mountains of horrible things that Donald Trump has done. But I think this story is so pertinent because just like what he said yesterday about the drugs, it shows an aggressive commitment to stereotypes and a belief in stereotypes as fact and a willingness to act on them. That's what's scary, is he doesn't just see a black guy in a hoodie and assume, oh, that guy's maybe a criminal, and then think, oh, I shouldn't think that. Like kind of normal white people have that, ingrained racism in them, and that's, as long as you're aware of that, that's okay. But he not only takes the emotions that he feels and the stereotypes that he witnesses as fact, he's willing to implement policy to act on them. So again, in the wake of these Charlotte protests, he also wanted to implement a nationwide stop and frisk policy. If that doesn't scream fascism with the rhetoric of violent agitators, I don't know what does. But I haven't convinced you yet. That's okay. Here we go. The Central Park Five. I'm reading from a Guardian article where they did a very good expose. Of course, The Guardian, wonderful. If you guys are looking for great journalism, The Guardian, always. But this was from a few months ago, but his rhetoric yesterday really reminded me of this. Yusef Salaam was 15 years old when Donald Trump demanded execution for a crime he did not commit. Nearly 3 decades before the rambunctious billionaire began his run for president, before he called for a ban on Muslims entering the United States, for the expulsion of all undocumented migrants, before he branded Mexicans as rapists and was accused of mocking the disabled, Trump called for the reinstatement of the death penalty in New York following a horrific rape case in which 5 teenagers were wrongly convicted. So you can say, people back then didn't really know. Everyone thought the Central Park Five were the ones that went after that woman. If you're not familiar with the case, I'm going to go through it with you. But he was the fire starter, Salaam said of Trump in his first extended interview since Trump announced his run for the White House. Common citizens were being manipulated and swayed into believing that we were guilty. What happened was, this was in 1989. This was when the crack epidemic was at its peak. A lot of the fear-mongering associated with the crack epidemic was at its peak. Reagan is responsible for a lot of this, and just the war on drugs and crack babies and crack mothers and all that stuff. And all of those stereotypes were associated with poor black people in the cities. And at this point, crime in New York was really high up. And it was just a perfect storm for racism in the country. Basically, a 28-year-old investment banker named Trisha Melly, she was white, she was jogging, and she was bludgeoned, raped, tied up. She was left for dead, but she didn't die, and she had severe brain damage. The New York Police Department believed they already had the culprits in custody. That same night, a group of more than 30 youths had entered the park from East Harlem. Some engaged in a rampage of random criminality, hurling rocks at cars, assaulting and mugging passers-by. Among the group was Salaam, along with the 14-year-olds Raymond Santana and Kevin Richardson, 15-year-old Anton McRae, and 16-year-old Corey Wise. So these were teenagers kind of fucking around in the park, and they ended up getting caught in this firestorm. They would all later deny any involvement in criminality that night, but as they were rounded up and interrogated by police at length, they said they were forced into confessing into a rape. I would hear them beating up Corey Wise in the next room, recalled Salaam. They would come and look at me and say, "You realize you're next." The fear made me really feel like I was not going to be able to make it out. 4 of the boys signed confessions and appeared on video without a lawyer. arguing that while they had not been the individual to commit the rape, they had witnessed one of the others do it, thereby implicating the entire group. Beyond the police misconduct, and criminality, that's just the overview of the case. They were coerced into giving these confessions. So Donald Trump paid a reporter $85,000 to take out advertising space in 4 of the city's newspapers, including the New York Times, under the headline, "Bring back the death penalty, bring back the police." And above his signature, Trump wrote, I want to hate these muggers and murderers. They should be forced to suffer, and when they kill, they should be executed for their crimes. They must serve as examples so that others will think long and hard before committing a crime or act of violence. So you can say, oh, but he really believed that the Central Park Five were guilty, and yeah, he's tough on crime, and all of that stuff. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. All 5 boys pleaded not guilty at the trial the following year. The prosecution's case rested almost entirely on the confessions they had given shortly after the incident. As would become crucial later on, there was no DNA evidence linking them to any of the crime scene, and Mealy, who made a miraculous recovery and testified in court, could not remember any details of the attack. The jury found all 5 boys guilty. The court condemned them to prison, and so they went to prison. As you're seeing, they're going to be exonerated. In 2002, after Salam had served 7 years in prison, Matias Reyes, a violent serial rapist and murderer already serving life inside, came forward and confessed to the Central Park rape. He stated that he had acted by himself. A re-examination of DNA evidence proved it was his semen alone found on Mealy's body, and just before Christmas that year, the convictions against each member of the Central Park Five were vacated by New York Supreme Court. By this point, Trump had gotten his wish. The death penalty had been reinstated in New York since 1995 at great cost to the state. It was subsequently abolished in 2007 without a single execution carried out. Following a 14-year court battle, the Central Park Five settled a civil case with the city for $41 million in 2014. But far from offering an apology for his conduct in 1989, Trump was furious. In an opinion piece for the New York Daily News, he described the case as the heist of the century. Settling doesn't mean innocence, but indicates incompetence on several levels, Trump wrote, alluding to how the police and prosecutors initially involved in the case have long maintained that the 5 boys were involved in the rape, even after the convictions were thrown out. So yes, definitely take the police's word for it. So that means Trump is willing to disregard DNA evidence because it doesn't fit his preconceived notion of this racial stereotype. These men lost years of their lives because he put an advertisement calling for their deaths in the New York Times and spent tens of thousands of dollars on those advertisements beyond his lobbying outside of that. He was the racist face to this particular case. And when they were exonerated by DNA evidence, he still did not admit he was wrong. Because for him, emotions mean reality. They mean the same thing. He sees a black guy and he has preconceived notions about that. As I've said before, most people say, okay, I know that these are preconceived notions, and then I want to move beyond them because those are emotions and that's not reality. But what Donald Trump thinks is, no, that's my first thought, and I'm going to continue to go with that. And I'm going to say that, yes, obviously, obviously there's drugs involved in these Charlotte riots, obviously, because that's how I feel. And people saying, oh, he's just playing to the base of idiots that are going to vote for him. They've been saying that since the primary. He's actually a Democrat at heart. But as you guys have always said, there are racist Democrats too. And he's not just racist. He's a racist with fascist tendencies. He wants to crack down on lawless conduct. How would he treat you? Say you individually were accused of something you didn't commit. He would throw the fucking book at you. Look at this. Look at this guy. This is the guy running for president. And I know that obviously no one here is a fan of Hillary Clinton, but we have to be honest about the fact that when this man had a public voice in the New York scene decades ago, when he had the ability to actually make a difference, which is the closest we're going to get for him in terms of legislative history and what, we have a big chunk of material on Hillary Clinton, where we don't have anything on Donald Trump. He's a wild card. This is really the closest we're going to get because he had a say in the way that the future of these 5 boys was going to play out. When faced with that decision, look what he did. No commitment to the facts, just commitment to stereotypes, and he wanted them dead, and stands by that to this day.